get started with our CFAC meeting kicking off the 22-23 school year. Just a brief recap, we started this process in June of 2021, looking at how to tackle the issues facing Orting School District. And this committee looked at a lot of data, looked at enrollment forecasts, looked at the present condition and inventory of our facilities, looked at what's happening with growth and development, and made a recommendation to the board of directors that the time to act is now. And so last year, the committee made a recommendation to really move forward with 3 broad projects. 1, replacing the Orting Primary School with a new Orting Elementary School. And 2 would be an updated Ptarmigan Ridge. The recommendation of the committee was to have comparability amongst our elementary schools, so we think about the types of learning space, technology, furniture, things that we have that make schools school. They wanted comparability between those schools and really recommended to the board that that investment start in the valley floor. And the third aspect that they recommended was a first phase of Orting High School to replace the existing gymnasiums and add permanent capacity. And we looked at what that looks like not only in a first phase plan when we were last together, but also what does that look like over a multi-year phase. And this committee gave feedback to our architect team. Our architect team brought to the committee back a couple of different draft designs and got some input about what a future elementary would look like, and also presented a couple of different ideas about what a future whole high school would look like. So not only what the first phase would be, but what does that look like when you think about phase 2 and phase 3. They went away for the summer. They are now back where we get to see the big reveal. So for the first time publicly, we'll get to see the designs and inspiration behind that new Orting Elementary School. We'll see what the updates at Ptarmigan Ridge would look like and have a touch base. And then we'll also see what a whole high school would look like as a draft. It's not a final design, but what a draft would look like, and then what specifically that first phase of OHS would look like. So this is primarily led by our architect. With us tonight, we have Brian Love from NAC Architecture. Liz Leroy will give the committee just a few updates with regard to traffic, mitigation, things like that. And our goal is to have everybody home, out of the door, not home maybe, but out the door by 7:30 is the commitment. We want to start on time and end on time. That's part of our norms that we discuss. So for our audience away, this is going to be live streamed. People will be able to access this information. And then we'll talk as we wrap up what our future committee meetings are going to look like, because we want to keep this conversation going and make sure the public knows what's happening and why. So, Mr. Love, you ready to take it away and share some inspiration? Or Liz, are you going to wow us with some fancy language around traffic and mitigation and stuff? Liz Leroy, everybody.
Hi, nice to see everybody again. I'll be really brief. We have been moving forward with our permitting process at a high level to make sure that we're on, kind of ready to start some of the work come February. So I want to talk briefly about that. We have been going through a rezone process for the property just north of us, and that process has taken traffic studies into consideration. So what we're working closely with the city for is that rezone. We do go to the Planning Commission next month, so that process starts on the first Monday of every month. You're welcome to join us and sit through that process. They are going through another rezone of another parcel in the city of Orting, so we are combined with one other rezone within the city limits. And what they really look at is traffic impacts and what that previous use has to do with the new use that the school district is proposing. Also wetland, they also consider wetland in that rezone process. We've also gone through some discussions with the Corps of Engineers to make sure that we're giving them the right information to mitigate some of those areas that we talked at our last meeting about, to make sure that we're capturing and having access in the key areas to develop that new elementary school. So those are the 3 processes that we're going through right now. All right, I'll pass it to Brian.
All right, thank you, Liz. And when Ed was talking about getting you out on time, that was a direct message to me. I understand my responsibility right now. So when we came to this group previously, we asked for your priorities. From the things in the high school, what was the most important programs that we should make sure to design in that phase 1? And so, of course, we were looking at the physical education spaces and then specific academic spaces, classroom expansion, as well as CTE spaces for 250 to 300 students. And also, when we came to you previously, we showed you 2 rough ideas of what a master plan could look like. One was a more open, disconnected campus, with individual buildings, much like you have now. And then one was a connected campus where you're all inside the building and able to reach every spot inside the school from inside. One of the outcomes of this was, I feel like, a little bit more of a warm feeling toward the connected campus. And one of the updates that we can share is we met with the high school twice since we came to this group, and some of the updates that we heard from them were fine-tuning what is the program that should be focused in for the classrooms and for the CTE spaces. And what we heard was science rooms are a priority, and specifically they chose a model where the science rooms aren't owned by the science teachers, but they can be flexibly used, which is a very efficient use of space. And then also specific CTE spaces that are going to be able to really benefit the most from having upgraded facilities, which is the whole point of putting some of these classroom spaces in the phase 1. Additionally, we heard about what exactly the wrestling room should have in it to make the best use of that really valued program for this community. And then finally, under that other considerations section, we understood that really the current locker room capacity that we have is sufficient until a future phase, at which point more lockers could be added to be able to facilitate some of the ways that lockers are used during games, when there's competitions at the school. And then finally, we were challenged to be able to maintain the capacity that you currently have in portables. These are 6 portables over on that side of the site, and it would really be great if we could continue to use those so that we don't lose that capacity during the next phase of construction. One of the other things that we did is we did some technical exploration of the site. Specifically, we did some soil borings to understand whether or not some of the existing buildings had suitable foundations that would meet the current building code. And so the borings that we did were around one of the classroom buildings, the curved building that we're very close to right now, and then around the current gymnasium space. And what we discovered is that the foundations in that area are not going to be able to meet current building code for, let's say, specifically at this point, talking about the gymnasium space. And the challenge that we have with that is that we're not able to construct a new building right next to a building that is not meeting code. And so that portion of the building, that gymnasium, is one that would need to go away when we look at the phase 1 construction. And to be clear, when I'm talking about the foundations and the challenges that we have with that, what we're talking about is not a life risk. It is that in the event of an earthquake, the soils in this entire area are what's called prone to liquefaction, meaning in an earthquake, they just don't hold as much weight as they could when they're not in an earthquake. What happens during an earthquake then is buildings settle. So in an earthquake, that is what they call the design earthquake, that building could settle as much as a foot. We don't want to have a building right next to it if that is going to settle by a foot. So both the district as well as the jurisdiction, it's really prudent to not have that be a part of the new construction, and in fact have it be demolished as a part of the phase 1 construction. One of the other things we learned was about some of the mechanical systems that we need to keep online, because there's a very special room that's part of the gym that has a mechanical equipment that serves the district offices, and we want to make sure that they have heat through the winter. So we need to have a little bit more complicated phasing so that that area remains operational. And so we're going to show you in quick succession how that high school project could be constructed. So that first step would be to demolish some of the existing buildings. That'd be the wrestling room and the covered play area that is to the north of the current gym. Notably, we're not demolishing the gym right now because we want to keep that entire area operational, so you have a gym operational even during construction. The next step would be to construct the new wrestling room as well as the mechanical spaces that are going to serve the new building, and then build the new main gym as well as the academic spaces that I had mentioned that are science and CTE focused. Step 3 is to demolish the old main gym. And then step 4, we're adding a couple of spaces in the footprint of where the old gym is. Those are some storage spaces, as well as some supplemental restrooms. So even though we're not doing full locker rooms, we still have adequate restroom facilities. And when it comes to the actual look of the campus and the way that it would function during construction, that's what this graphic is showing. So the area in red that you're seeing here, that would belong to the contractor. That's the area where they're putting down materials, they have their equipment. That's an area that they are operating in on a day-to-day basis to construct the new facility. Notice that it does not come around to the front of the building here. We would want to keep that open so that the building can continue to operate. And that main gym that would be kept for part of the phase, that would continue to be used by your building until the new main gym is constructed. The area in blue that you're seeing is an adapted play space for OPS. It's not just the play area that is immediately to the southeast of the school, also including a hard surface play area here that currently is a parking area. So that could become a play space with some equipment. This is also showing some changes to the way that site circulation could work. So this could become a new drop-off area for OPS. So coming along here and then using the roundabout and then coming back out. And then buses continuing much the same way they do now. And then finally, those 6 portables that we were challenged to keep, we found an area for them over here on an area that's currently some of the high school parking. So when we look at the actual floor plan for the high school space, I'm going to zoom into what each of those rooms was actually included in the plans. So we said we have a new wrestling room. The size of that wrestling room is 2.5 mats. So it's 2 mats plus an area for practicing, and then a walking area and some bleachers next to it. So it could also be used for spectating and for waiting. Then we have a lot of the existing facilities that continue. The new main gym. The new main gym is sized so that you can have full-size basketball here, full-size basketball here, and then with bleachers that come down from the north and the south, you would have the main court in the middle. I should say also that the wrestling room is sized so that it could also be a basketball court if the mats are put in storage. Additionally, off to the side here, we have the health sciences room and then a makerspace that would be used as an academic program space. And then up on the second floor, that's where we have some of the science labs that I talked about, and then adding in an additional classroom. The prep space there would be shared between both of those science lab spaces. And this is kind of the finished condition for that site plan. Notice when I say the finished condition, if this is at the end of phase 1, then Orting Elementary School is open at this point, meaning Orting Primary School now can be used for capacity at the high school to be able to have some additional students in that space until an additional phase would be ready to go. And it would probably want me to note here that we are not expecting the high school students to just move right in with the same furniture and the same finishes. There are improvements to that, and high school sized furnishings that would be used in that space. And I don't know if Ed saw this before. He's no, hey, this is no. Okay, so a new slide for everybody tonight then. So this is what the wrestling room could look like. Again, it's kind of a tall ceiling because that would need to be able to be used for basketball. And so we'd have basketball backstops that can fold or slide or fold up or to the side out of the way. Those 2 large wrestling mats and then a practice area, and then the bleachers off to the side. I think what we've planned is about 5 rows in terms of the size of that space. And then plenty of area to hang all of the many awards and accolades that that program is known for. And second new slide of the night. This could be the makerspace. So a really open, flexible area. Saw the robotics arena that's in the current makerspace. So being able to have that kind of space, that's it, to to be able to be flexibly used and move furniture out of the way for that program. Lots of storage for the classes that are moving in and out of that space, and then lots of pin-up and display so that the students are able to record their work and show it to other people, and get excited about technology and career. Notably, there are some spaces in the curved building that could also be upgraded to continue to extend the life of some of those academic spaces. And so two that are targeted right now are the culinary arts, which has some challenging ventilation and the equipment is a little bit older. And then the second is the current maker space that is still an amazing, large, flexible use space that could see action from a variety of different programs. Maybe it's agricultural sciences, maybe it continues to have some of the heavier use equipment in it, but being able to set aside some funding so that that space gets upgraded and those facilities can continue to be used for academic purposes. And as Ed had mentioned, this is just a master plan of what the other phases could be following phase one. So phase one here with quite a bit more definition in the corner. And then knowing that we need to keep Orting Primary School as high school capacity, phase two would likely continue across the north at the front of the site. In that we'd look to include some things like additional common space and maybe some food service spaces. And then phase three, a lot of capacity and more common space. And then finally phase four, some of the spaces for performing arts and for additional capacity. In a connected campus, as we talked about. And although there are lots of exciting things happening on the high school site, it is kind of a part of a bigger campus of development. So the elementary school that is on the far north end, the zone in the middle that could have a variety of different uses that you will weigh in on later this evening, and then finally the high school that is here on the far south end. And then of course currently we're putting together some budget numbers to understand again, what those priorities are and how we're able to make the best realization of it. Do a time check. Right, good. Right, we're going to move on to the elementary school. So again, when we came to you last time with the elementary school, we had two separate concepts that the elementary school design committee had narrowed down. There was this one that was more of a courtyard scheme, where you had two wings of the building that were surrounding a courtyard that could continue and flow into the wetland area. And then we had this scheme called the academic village that had more of these individual grade level houses coming off to the side. And that had this plan. And we got great feedback from this group. I think based on the feedback that we got from this group last time, we made some pretty significant improvements to this plan, and this is the design that the elementary school group selected. And if you're ever wondering what the priorities are going to be one way or the other with a group of teachers, it always comes down to the students, what is best for the students, and I think that was really one of the primary reasons why this scheme was preferred, because as you can see, there can be this ability to have grade level groupings, grade level houses, so all of the teachers and the students at that grade level are able to work together collaboratively, able to mentor each other, able to co-teach in a way that has a nice scale in a much bigger building than what they have now. When we began our entire process with the elementary school, we had some guiding words that we wanted to keep in mind when we looked at what should this building look like, what ideas should it express, and how should it feel. So that's what we're going to talk about now. One of the major inspirations that we have when it comes to the feeling of a building is a lot about context. What is the place that we are designing for? And when it comes to some of those inputs, there are some, I guess, more specific written guidelines that the city gives about what buildings here in this downtown area should look like. Also, they have some books that we looked at that have images to keep in mind. And then I just think in general there's the history and the character of Orting itself that is compelling and rich on its own. Here's our elementary school, and the site plan zoomed out. You access it off of the future roundabout at Whitehawk, and then wind around, and we're winding around like that, so we are avoiding any wetlands on that site. To a bus drop-off, and I'll zoom in now, to a bus drop-off on the east, and then a parent drop-off in the northwest. So our main arrival into the building is along this axis right here, and also continuing that axis across, that is the view toward Mount Rainier. You can see we kind of quieted some of the angles of the building, made it a little bit more organized while still keeping the character of those grade level houses. Additionally, we've been doing some technical work to make sure that, in this case, stormwater is maintained and you don't have a soggy site. Also looking at building systems to make sure that we can build it once and build it right, and maintain what you all have invested in. So as it comes to the character of the building, there is a little bit information from the city about Victorian or turn-of-the-century Western character. We kind of abstracted that and saw, well, what is that really talking about? And some of the key characteristics were covered walkways, vertical entry features, that's this emphasis on the verticality, right where the main door into these buildings is, and then also horizontal belts. And what they mean by that is these breaks at the floor lines that give a sense of scale to the building. Another key characteristic of Victorian architecture is the window box. It is the bay window that really kind of projects you out into the landscape. When it came to the materials, we took inspiration from two different places. I confess I love the district office building. I may be the only person who loves it. But what I love about it is that it's been built onto over time. And every time that it was built onto, the people that did that, they changed the material a little bit. They wanted you to know that they had built onto it. It's almost like they were calling attention to the repair and the care and the investment that they made each time they fixed what had come before. And I thought that that was really a beautiful visual story of the continual reinvestment in education in this community. Another aspect of the form that we took inspiration from is the history of Orting. And we saw this mural on the outdoor store of Kohler Farm. And we noticed this what I at first naively called a barn. This is an oast. This is a hop barn or a hop kiln. And we learned that hop production is instrumental in the history of Orting, from the donation land grants and people moving to this area, and then so many farmers discovering that hops are something that is a boom crop. It grows really well here. It grew so well that the people who were here couldn't farm it just by themselves. They needed more people to come from further away to be able to help them farm it. And I think that boom crop, it began this population boom here as well, that brought a lot of people to this area. So I thought that this form is a very poetic way of referencing that this is a cornerstone moment in the history of Orting. I'll point out that this image here on the left is a photo of the barn that is illustrated here. This is a photo of the Kohler hop kiln. It does not exist anymore, but there are some in the area that do. This is one that's been preserved in Falls City. And we were curious if this is something that's particular to Orting or something that is more universal, and discovered that it's quite universal. Here is some hop kilns in Healdsburg, California, and I saw images as far away as Tasmania that have very similar forms. It's this vertical wood form, pretty steep roof, and then this ventilation, in this case, element on top. And you'll notice that some of you have Post-it notes on your table. I know some of you have seen these images already, but they might be new to some of you. And what we're really curious about is, what are the words that come into your head when you see the renderings or the images that we're going to show you? What's that reaction? Just like one word. And I'd really like you to write it down on the Post-it note, because after I'm done talking about this, you're going to get a break, and you're going to get to walk around, and I'd like you to post it. I'm going to turn these boards over, and I have the renderings on them, and I'd like you to post it on the image that inspired that word, because we're really curious what's coming into your mind when you see them. I should hear the sound of pen scribbling. So this is, yes, this is an image on, called the wetland side of the building. So this is not the main entry. This is if you were standing on the south side and you were looking toward, in this case, the library. That's the library here. And then what you're seeing off to the right and to the left, those are our classroom wings. And the space that you'll see right here when we go to a plan, that's a kind of flexible use space in between the classrooms that teachers are able to use or specialists are able to use. And this is the landscape off in the front with some drainage to be able to connect into the wetland to recharge it. This is the entry into the building. The drop-off loop is just a little bit off to your right. This is the path that takes you to the entry. Here are those covered walkways that we talked about to try and keep people dry while they're waiting to be picked up. Off to the left, we have the gymnasium and commons. Off to the right, we have the administration and some special education spaces. And then also up above, that's the library, again, with that kind of undulating form, wood form, and then some pop-ups, much like the hop kiln. Okay. I'll just touch on this to say, as we commented, one of the things that the teachers really liked was this grade level grouping of the classrooms, and so that's what we have here. This space that I was pointing out as a shared space that had the wood kind of hop kiln look to it in one of the first renderings, that's this right here. Again, it's intended to be used kind of flexibly by specialists, by special education. And the other view that we were looking at just now was off to this side and looking at the entry. So the next view that you're going to see is standing right here, kind of that major point of arrival in the building, and you're looking across this stair and underneath the library. Some of the things that we heard from our design committee that they appreciated about the aesthetic, the way that the inside of the building could look, is having a lot of natural materials that would feel warm and would feel an appropriate level of rustic for Orting. This is an enlarged view of one of those classroom wings. Again, really trying to make it so that people can see into that shared area. They can connect across classrooms and have lots of different ways that they can group students in the classroom to support many different types of learning. And then this is a view in one of those shared areas, looking out over the wetland and toward another one. These are some offices that could be used by specialists if you need that acoustic privacy. And then our last view, we're up here on the second floor and we're standing in the library and we're looking back out. What's this? And I think if the lights would spontaneously turn off again, we would see Mount Rainier in this direction, but I think it's just too bright today. All right, so again, I think you sat through that so well. I'm sure that you wrote down some words. Why don't we take, say, 2 minutes? I'm gonna turn these boards over. If you can post what you had, and then I'll join you back here to talk about PTR and the rest of the presentation. To be clear, we want all of your comments. We want your honest reaction, because that's why you're here. I mean, the Citizens Facility Advisory Committee, we need your advice for what you're hearing. So if there is something that you felt like you were holding back or something you wanted to say, at the end, please go ahead and post it back up again. These will be up here the entire time. We're going to go ahead and move on to talk about PTR. because of course with a new elementary school, we want to make sure that there's a comparable educational experience between both of the elementary schools. And so some of the things that have been targeted at PTR to be able to upgrade, we've heard that there's some challenges with the drop-off, especially for the buses. It can get really congested and it's difficult for people to get back around. You'll note that there's a portion of the planned addition that would be located on top of a current play area, so being able to improve the drainage on other portions of the site, which I believe are down here, that have a tendency to get kind of mucky in the wet weather, is something that we're targeting. And then also, as you're seeing, as it relates to the building itself, in terms of new addition, this is showing an 8 classroom addition. This is showing a new and expanded kitchen, and then this a independent gymnasium. Beyond this, though, of course, being able to have upgraded furniture, upgraded finishes, and technology, so that again it's a comparable experience between the two buildings. So this is that enlarged version, so you can see a little bit more about how those additions fit into the existing building, since previously there was the gym commons cafeteria was detached. Now this would begin to connect those two internally and then have the 8 classroom addition off to the side. So zooming in on that, so again that's the 8 classrooms and then some service spaces and a resource room here to resolve the shape. And again, planning on prioritization for that. So now we're going to talk about overall big picture bond priorities, and also we're going to have you do another interactive activity to put on the hat of the planner. Think about what other projects beyond those major 3 that Ed mentioned are ones that are priorities and where they could go within all of the space that the district has. So when we first started, we received a lot of information about the recommendations from the CFAC group, and we had just talked about at the beginning of this presentation the priorities for the high school. And then within the overall district, you can see how many of those projects begin to be laid out on some of the open spaces that the district recently purchased. So the elementary school on this portion of the site, the high school where it would continue to be, and then some of the additions at OPS, and then the middle school, of course, here. That does leave some pockets of open space next to many of these buildings, and it also leaves a large open space here in the middle, in between the high school and the elementary school. And what you're seeing here is a what if. It's an example of what could be there. And here are 2 of those what ifs. Some of the other projects that could be considered to be able to augment the district's facilities. One example could be, hey, maybe that middle area could be developed with some athletic fields. Maybe a portion of that could also be a district office and some parking. So if the district office went elsewhere from where it currently is at, that means that the rest of the high school site could be dedicated entirely to the high school. Another example of what could be there instead, though, is maybe instead of it being athletic field like soccer, maybe it's more of a baseball and softball complex. You can see fitting here. It could entirely be different athletic facilities. Maybe there's some tennis courts that could be on this site. One of the things that has been mentioned that I don't have an illustration for, but again has been discussed, is maybe there's an area where there's a larger significant space for parking for the high school, since there's going to be a lot more students that need to be able to get to the academic facilities on the high school site. And then when we look at when these other things may happen, it's not to say, we're not saying, hey, let's target all of that for phase 1. We're really thinking, what are the priorities as we look longer term, longer range? Because certainly, as is underscored with the high school project, this is a process. This is not something that is done all in one 5-year stretch. This is something that is built up over time. with the different projects that are planned for phase one, maybe there are some additional things that could be considered. And this is just kind of a take on what some of these other projects could be as they're stretched out over subsequent bond phases. So some of those other projects that have been mentioned that could supplement, again, I call them capacity projects, the elementary schools, additions at middle schools, and additions at the high school. Some of those things have been transportation maintenance building, with the thought that what is currently here in the downtown area is not serving those needs as well as it could. A district administration building to replace what is currently on the high school site. And then finally, a central kitchen, which would be able to do food preparation and serve all of the other kitchens that are across the district, so that those individual kitchens are more warming kitchens. They don't need as intensive of facilities at each of the individual schools. On the non-building side, on the landscape side, some of the things that have been mentioned are tennis courts, additional high school parking. I mentioned other fields that could be considered, and I'll leave the question mark down there because in the activity that you are participating in, there's a blank square. So you could consider some other project. So I have 3 boards here. I'm going to put them on 3 separate tables, and we're going to play property bingo. Would you be able to answer? So the sites that the sites that you're going to get, I want to point out some of those other land areas where projects could be located. One of those would be in some of the open space in the fields next to PTR. That's what this question mark circle is indicating here. We talked about there's open space behind the middle school. That's another spot where there could be a project. As we commented, there's the big open space that is in the middle, in between the elementary school and the high school. That's big enough that I think you could probably put more than one thing at that location. And then finally, there is the downtown site where the current transportation maintenance facility is at. And what I don't have up here, but you will see on the site, is there's also the open space off of Orville Road that's shown on this site plan. That could be another consideration for a place to put something. So I want to challenge you to not just solve the problem, do one option, and then call it good. You're an architect now. As architects, we design in options. We always have to consider what an alternative could be. So I want to challenge you to come up with 2 options. You can have a favorite. Come up with 2 options to really stretch your thinking. And I think the 3 of us will be walking around to hear what you're thinking, hear some of the things that you're questioning about, and we can also be resources to help answer those questions. All right? How about we say this is going to be a 10-minute exercise? I'll look at the timer and begin. Bingo activity to a close, but I've heard so much great and thoughtful reasoning behind where things are going that I'd really like to be able to pass the microphone to each of the individual groups and be able to have them share some of their thinking. I know, this group is still grinding away at it, huh?
They would like someone from our group.
Yeah, I think I just want to pass this to someone and see if... I guess I'll go ahead and get this group started, because one of the things that I thought was pretty interesting about this group's thinking that I had not heard before is a lot of the thinking around where some of the programs could be located was circled around, well, how can we have this be not just a function for the district, but also an educational opportunity for students as well. And I think that was guiding some things like a central kitchen, possibly.
Yeah. Yeah, that was just the thought, is that if we are going to build a kitchen facility, could there be some kind of connection with our CTE programs, like kitchen in the culinary program, and we need early learning space, so could there be like student teachers that come and maybe support our preschools or observe our early learners, and that could be part of their CTE education. So having proximity to our high school for both the kitchen and the early learning center was something we had talked about.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. I hadn't heard that connection before. I'm going to come over to our group here, and I'm going to immediately push mine.
But am I sharing like all of it? Like our thoughts on all of it?
Just start with the vision.
And that doesn't include buses in the road.
Okay, so
We kind of started, I guess, in that center empty space. And we threw the parking in there and we added tennis courts, but we also added baseball, softball, soccer, and lacrosse, making it kind of one large athletic complex. And thinking that the parking could service both the high school as an overflow, but also the athletic facilities. And then we moved kitchen and maintenance actually behind the middle school, ideally if there's space for both of them, because we figure maintenance and buses could kind of have multiple ways of getting out. And then the kitchen is a nice center spot, kind of tucked away if the space works there. We added an early learning center right near PTR so it have access to both PTR and elementary school, and then district office off down the road. And then there was a thought about a pool down on, I don't even know what the street is.
Oh, that's
Orville.
There you go.
A pool/community center that could be utilized by all of Orting.
Very good, thank you. The Rec Center Central.
Not inspired, but I'll share.
So we went round and round for a long time about the whole maintenance building. And I am actually going to call out Bonnie. She's been here for a long time and she's got a lot of thoughts on that process. And what she said made sense. So whether or not it happens this way, who knows? But we kind of thought the maintenance and kitchen could all go out at the Orville property, knowing that obviously they need to do something with that access out there, probably around about at some point. District office in town, make it super cute like the new city hall is, so that as you drive by it, you recognize it. And also that might house all their community service. This is the end of a long day for me. So, okay, I cannot think straight. My boss wanted to sue everybody today, okay? So, anyway, other public services that would be there. So, extra parking in that space in between the high school and the new elementary school with ball fields, but I really like what you were saying about a whole complex of sports. So that makes sense to me. I love that idea. And then we just put tennis courts behind the middle school. But one of the reasons why not putting firm buildings back there was that we all know growth never stabilizes, it doesn't feel like. So we will need to probably use some space over there at some point, pushing more portables or more temporary housing or even more permanent housing back in there. So that was the thought process there. Thanks to Bonnie.
Last group, thank you. I know when we get started with these activities, it might seem kind of silly, and it's tough to get rolling. But then you all have such thoughtful and sequential ways of thinking through the challenge that we put before you, and it's fantastic to hear the care and attention that you bring to that vision for those priority projects. And see that is nearing the end of our presentation. I think there's just a couple of maybe dates.
Okay, where do we go from here? So there's a lot to finalize in just the next couple weeks, believe it or not. So everything that you saw today, we don't have a firm price on. And And so before we launch and commit to the public about what we attempt to do with this bond, we need to know that we can afford it, because promises made, promises kept. That's a discussion that we had last year. That's going to be very important. So over the next couple of weeks, we're going to get final numbers on these projects, and then be able to have a conversation at the board level about, okay, can we afford to do everything? What would stay, what would go? And your feedback will help inform that conversation. We have board members that you heard from tonight, and so we'll be wrestling with that, moving our way to a bond resolution next month in November, which will go to the voters pamphlet in December and feed us all the way to the election on February 14th. As a committee, we're going to come back together November 29th, and we'll hear from our good friends with Piper Sandler. If you remember Trevor Carlson from last year, he came and talked to us about the ideas, what resonates with voters, what's happening with interest rates in the market, what would the cost be. He's going to take the final numbers from the next couple of weeks, work those into a package, and then share that information with CFAC. And then we'll also discuss the final package that will move before the voters in February. And I'm sure we'll have some conversation about the ideas or topics or how you can help get the word out in that regard. So November 29th, we would hope to increase our engagement. The board is going to have what's called a town hall next Thursday, and we're going to open up the conversation on any topic. The board has been very active out in the community on several events to hear what people are thinking, what you're wondering about any topic. So the town hall will be open in general, and then we'll move to strategy-specific communication points around the bond in January and February with lots of communication. So when you come back in November, we'll have updates on the final package. We'll have communication standpoint of here's everything that's happening, and with good success in February, if the voters approve, then we'll shift the conversation to logistics, because you saw already tonight, there's a whole lot of things that need to be mapped to move even from there to moving out to seeking the contractor, getting interest built, and then we have to think about portables moving, and there's a lot of logistics. Not the least of which includes, now how do we move to 2 comparable K-5 elementary schools and think about boundaries, and what would that look like, and how do we move from now until then? So we see one firm meeting in November. If the voters give us a yes in February, then the next conversation will probably be 1 or 2 CFAC meetings this year to kind of close the loop on this chapter and get us ready to construction. So with that, we would happily, as a 3-person team, entertain any questions that you might have that we didn't answer thus far. One question.
I was wondering what you guys have thought of for the traffic between PTR and the middle school. Have you done any thinking of that?
Question is, what have we thought about with regard to traffic mitigation? Currently, we're doing the traffic mitigation and analysis. Before we get to permit, we're going to have to do the study of what's coming and what's going and think about how we're going to mitigate that. So at this point, that is under study. There is no plan that is developed yet. But the parking and the traffic, what are we doing with playground? How are we? Yeah, there's some logistics to work through on this one in the near term. But traffic is under study as we speak. Any other questions that are burning? So it's cool to think about what you saw tonight. Think about this. If successful, what you saw tonight will be here 50 years from now. And someone in the 50s had a conversation about what a new Orting primary school would be. And that's still standing. And so this conversation, we get a chance to be on the ground floor and bring this to fruition. Now put your mind in the eyes of our kids and think about our kindergartners and first grade who get to go to these facilities and have that be their experience here. And just let that sit with you as you walk out. That's what's at stake. That's what's on the line. And so we need to help get this word out. So if we have any challenges, it's getting the word out, getting people excited, build that engagement. And so what we would ask between now and November, talk to a friend, talk to a neighbor, talk to a colleague, help get them to the table so they can get part of this vision with us, because we have to build a momentum and get that word out there so people know what's happening and have a chance to be able to make up their own minds when it comes time to cast a ballot in February. Thank you for taking time away from your families, your friends, your loved ones to come and be actively participating. This will be standing and I'll be 6 feet under. So Bonnie and I were having the conversation about this is going to outlive us. Some of you, I don't know about that, but think I know the prognosis for beef, so this is exciting to know that we're actually building a vision that will outlive some of our careers, or a lot of our careers, and some of our lifespans, and that's all in the service of kids. So thanks for coming. It's going to be a fun adventure as we take the next step and move our way to February. Board, any final comments?
I would just like to thank everyone again for putting in the time and the thoughtfulness in this work, in your words. It matters. As Ed said, it matters to the kids and to our community. This is going to have a massive community impact. So just thankful for the time you've spent with us today. And yes, please encourage community members to be involved. This is our opportunity for their voice to be a part of our plan, and we'd like more people to participate.
And we got a thumbs up, a second on that thought. All right, y'all, thanks for coming out. Have a good night. Appreciate it.